So in February, when we initially started sending our COVID tests away, we were referring them all to Sheffield Teaching Hospital, the biggest laboratory in our region. It quickly became apparent that they couldn't handle the amount of workload that was going to come, so we were asked if we could source our own test. Luckily, we already had a molecular lab here at Doncaster for doing some of this testing, which gave us an advantage. We had good contacts with a company, a German company that supplied some equipment, and they'd been working alongside an English university graduate program to produce an assay for COVID. The COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus assay is what we use to detect COVID in our patient and staff samples. So the molecular PCR test you'll hear, polymerase chain reaction, is basically a molecular test, very sensitive and very specific test. Now, what makes PCR testing so useful and successful in this situation is that it is very sensitive. Now, when I say very sensitive, it means it'll pick up a very low level. Our assays now go down to 15 copies per microliter, which means we can pick up very small amounts of virus. So we get very few false negatives. But probably more importantly is that it's very specific in that it doesn't cross-react with other coronaviruses. So at this stage, we had a molecular lab already. It just needed tweaking to enable us to run COVID testing. The biggest issue for us at this point was the safety aspect, in that coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 was highly infectious and could pose a risk to our staff. So we had to source safety cabinets, a new way of working, produce a new COVID risk assessment for my staff. I had to make sure they were safe if they were performing these tests, that they weren't going to contract COVID themselves. But we managed to turn this around in 2 weeks, and we were ready to start testing in early April. If we were asked to take on a new assay to look for a new virus or anything normally, we'd be looking at a 3-month. The time it takes to get the documentation written, to source the equipment, to follow all the procurement rules, to get up and running quickly, train the staff. So being asked to turn this around so quickly, it just proved how important it was, how much it was needed, and to make sure we can protect our staff and produce a very quick turnaround test. Because the issues with referring them to an outside laboratory is not just the numbers, but the delay. We were looking at over 2 days to get a result, and once we were testing in-house, we got that down to 11 hours. The process for PCR testing for COVID-19 at DBTH involves the taking of a nasopharyngeal swab using the green top viral swabs, which contain antibiotics which kill off any bacteria and reduce the chance of contamination. It's not a pleasant experience having the swab. Having it done myself, it's not nice. But that stage is very important, because if the samples isn't any good, then we won't get a good result. The samples transported to us, the quicker the better. The transport teams have been brilliant in reducing that. The QI team got involved to help us try and make the process leaner, which was very, very important. The samples arrive in the lab. We make sure they're labelled up correctly, all the patient identifiers match, and we book them into our lab system. Once it's in the COVID lab, first of all, we have to extract any genetic information in there. So the DNA, RNA, we need to extract that using a molecular extraction process. Once we have that, we have an extract, a small amount of DNA or RNA. It is this that we test using the PCR method. The whole process is labour intensive, it's time consuming. We have to work safely, we have to make sure we don't contaminate the samples. This involves a large amount of PPE, a large amount of cleaning the lab as we go. We reduce the amount of staff in there. Every member of staff working in there has to sign a risk assessment, has to be fully competent, has to feel safe working with these samples. The actual PCR test itself uses specific primers. Now, these primers in this assay only look for SARS-CoV-2, nothing else. And that's how we reduce the chance of false positives. The method uses lots of heating and cooling steps, but basically what we're looking to do is amplify up the SARS-CoV-2 if it's present. And then a measurable fluorescent signal is what gives us a quantifiable result. If there's SARS-CoV-2 in the sample, we'll get fluorescence. If there isn't, we won't. And that's how we get our positive result. So initially, we had 2 extractors and 1 PCR instrument. This enabled us to do 100 samples per day. This quickly became apparent that this wasn't enough to handle our workload. The Trust was brilliant in supporting us to get hold of a second analyzer and more extraction equipment and some fixed-term staff to help us increase our numbers to where we are now. We can do up to 600 a day. So luckily, we've not had to refer any outside this lab since December. Very busy, we run the extended day. All staff are having to work in a different format to how they used to work, but that's the only way we've managed to handle this workload. Another development was we moved to a multiplex assay. So our assay not only detects SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, we can also detect influenza A, influenza B and RSV, 3 common and very infectious respiratory viruses. We are the only laboratory locally that offers this on all screening and one of the few in the country. So this is very significant, especially once you move towards winter, that we can pick up the viruses that may be mixed up with COVID-19. We use the Facebook group to try and act on feedback from staff. Now, staff were saying they needed the result quicker, particularly staff results, so we moved to texting staff. Our IT department's been brilliant in supporting us in doing this, so we could get staff results to them quickly, hoping this would reduce the impact on covering shifts, because staff were waiting for that negative result before they could work. Communications has been massively important, and it's evolved all the way through. We've used the Facebook page, we use WhatsApp groups, we've got liaisons with coronary care, the pre-op team, bed management. So every day is basically how can we turn these results around quicker. So as well as our normal PCR, we moved to an in-house urgent assay, a piece of equipment we call it's called the film array. So the film array instrument that we have in the laboratory was sourced using charity money from Fred and Anne Green. Originally we got the equipment in for neonatal meningitis detection. Luckily the company then developed a COVID-19 assay, which has then developed into a full respiratory panel. Very important, especially if we've got pre-ops or patients need transferring to other hospitals or any urgent test. The quickest we can do our normal PCR is 5 hours. We can do this in an hour and 15 minutes. Gives us a really nice avenue. And then we also moved to the point of care testing. We supported the Trust in bringing in the Abbott assay on the wards. Again, has been brilliant. We do confirm the results, but it helps give the ward staff that initial indicator this person's COVID positive. Point of care COVID assays in use in the Trust are very good. They can produce a result in 10 minutes. The assays are not as sensitive and as specific as our in-house PCR, which is why we still confirm. So you will get slightly more false negatives or false positives. So it is good practice to confirm. However, they are brilliant in ruling out positives. So if someone comes into A&E, we can pick up a positive COVID-19 really quickly and make sure they're managed. The challenges that we've all been going through in home life and the changes needed at the hospital, there have been major issues with supplies. Plastics particularly across the country, across the world, have been hard to get. Our procurement team have been brilliant all the way through, not just pathology's procurement team, but the Trust procurement team in helping me get things through the door quickly, even helping bring the analyzers up from stores. The whole team effort's been brilliant. Staffing's also been an issue because the microbiology workload didn't really drop off. Some of the Trust workload did, but obviously with infectious disease, that hasn't stopped because of COVID. The pre-op work obviously changes, but our routine work has stayed quite heavy. So we needed extra staff. The Trust were very good in allowing us to take on 3 12-month fixed-term members of staff, and they've been brilliant. They've stepped into this role in the midst of COVID, and we're very grateful for that they got straight up and running, 2 of them working directly in the COVID lab. We've also had to deal with outbreaks. We were needed by public health to support outbreak detection in prisons. We had a major outbreak and our staff turned in extra hours to make sure we could get those results out quickly and isolate the issues. This has happened with wards as well. At any point where we felt we could handle the workload went up. So we started off at 100 per day a year ago, and that is now 500, 600 a day, pretty much every day. So we've continuously, I always say we have to bend with the wind in pathology because it changed all the time. Outbreaks happen, infectious disease is not a standard workflow at any point. But the staff have been brilliant. the changes have happened daily originally and then moved to weekly and monthly and what's been expected of them, and they've handled it brilliantly. Of all the things I'm proud of, I think the department have stayed smiling. And I think it's hard to do, but they have. And I think we don't see the patients, we're not patient facing. It's a very niche role. And I think this year a spotlight's been shone on pathology, which hasn't been before. I think people think we're the strange people in white coats, which we are. That hasn't changed, but I think people have got a better understanding of what we do, how we do it, why it's important. This time pathology have really been involved in supporting the trust. Rather than just receiving everything in, we've tried to get everything out and get the information out, get the supplies out so everyone can get these tests turned around quickly. For recording and distributing results and making sure that everyone knows about positive and negative results quickly, that's changed pretty much every week since we started. Initially we had consultant microbiologists phoning out all positive results. This soon became too difficult to manage, so we moved to getting other medical support staff who've been excellent in phoning the wards. We moved to using text messages, SMS messaging to make sure that staff can get the results quickly. That was really well fed back to us that, I think prior to that, results might have been ready for hours before anyone found out, so that was a really big development. We had to change our authorising process. The virology department, we would normally be closed at 5 o'clock. We've had to extend our working day till 10 p.m. In the early days, myself and my chief biomedical scientist, Michelle, we were authorising from home because the work was getting completed in the lab at 8, 9 o'clock at night. We wanted to ensure those results got out. It seemed a shame for the work to be done, but results not to be communicated. As part of that work, we also had to inform the government on our daily figures, positives, negatives, that's been a large part of our workload for a year. 21 years in microbiology, and it's the hardest year I've ever been through. That being said, there's been so many positives. Seeing the team come together, not just in microbiology, in the whole trust has been brilliant, and I'm very proud, and that's my takeaway this year, is I'm very proud of the team. Microbiology fully had to change the way we work, extend our day, bring in extra equipment, and the staff just rolled with it continuously, no complaints. Not just microbiology, the blood sciences department were amazing in setting up the antibody testing. It was a huge piece of work, very long days getting that set up, and again, brilliant. Histology department did a lot of work extending the mortuary, preparing us for COVID. So when people talk about the COVID response in pathology, it's not just those doing the COVID testing. The whole support team around them in pathology has been amazing. That includes our IT team, our procurement team, our admin support. Everybody in pathology has been excellent. So that's my biggest reflection, is seeing how well we can adapt. And I think in an ever-changing sort of diagnostics world, which we work in, which people don't know about, they've seen the work we can do. Or making people think about this as a career. I think there is a slight gap in recruitment, so I think it'd be nice that people have seen this and seen the laboratory support and thought, oh, that's interesting. They might not, but they might, and I embrace that. We've always said if people want to ask more, want to have a lab tour, we can do that. In terms of how the teams work together, I think the Chief Biomedical Scientist, Michelle, has been excellent this year. Without her, I wouldn't have been able to have any time off, and I'm very grateful for that. And also Paul Gravel, Head of Pathology, has kept us all together this year. Daily meetings, support, even just a chat when things have got hard. And so yeah, seeing pathology work as I knew we could, but maybe other people seeing what we can do when pushed. I'd also really like to thank my wife, Jo, because I've not been at home as much as I'd like to be in this last year, and when I have been at home, I've been working a lot. So my wife, my family have been excellent in keeping me going this year, because it has been a hard year, and I'm sure that's the case for all the trust staff. I can't imagine how hard it is working with patients, and I've never had to. But I feel like this time round, pathology's been involved more than ever before, and I think that's been really important. you.